So, John McMullen, that is why I've been very ornery today.
Now, wait, you sneezed for one consecutive hour?
One.
Is that what we're trying to say?
You ever see those guys? They're like, when you're allergic to something and you just can't stop. You do it all the time, PT. You have that sneeze where you can't stop.
I have like 3 or 4 sneezes in a row, but then it'll.
Yeah, I could see like 4 or 5 sneezes in a row. I see that all the time.
An hour consecutive. Now, I'm usually a 2 sneezer, and my sneezes are pretty violent. I have a big, violent, but 2 violent sneezes. This was
I can't
short,
wait
quick
for that
burst.
hour of the sports badge. That's what I want to see. I want to see the sneezing fit.
Yeah. Well, this
I
was.
want to see the sneezing fit sports hour.
This was short, quick burst of sneezes, just like pew, 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 pew. I mean, consecutively. I was like, you got to be kidding me. And you know what's funny? I never have tissues in my house. Never, ever, ever have tissues in my house.
Now that's bad.
I don't use tissues. I never have a runny nose.
Not
never
even in the bathroom?
No, I don't need a tissue ever.
Yeah, that's a bad job. You got to have some around.
I do. And somebody brought tissues to my house the other day. I just got, and I said, you know what? I need a damn tissue. My nose was profusely running for the whole entire hour. I said, what the hell is going on right now? I'm sneezing at 2 o'clock in the morning for an hour consecutively.
You got to get some Zyrtec, some tissues.
Getting old thing is for the birds, McMullen. It's for the birds. A lot to get into today. Sports Bash Live, 97.3, ESPN. The Eagles on the bye week. We got plenty to talk about, John, because, you know, I look at this bye week interesting. What they have coming up down the stretch is it's not easy. I mean, they're 8-1, but this season can take a turn. If you remember, you know, they were 3-1 last year. They actually were 5-4 at one point and lost 7 out of 9 to kind of their season went off the rails at that point there, including, 5 straight. I'm not saying that their season's going to go off the rails here, but, hey, 2 Dallas games, a trip to Seattle and L.A. back-to-back. That's your season right there. And I'm not saying that if you lose all 4 of those games, you're still probably making the playoffs. But I'll tell you what, being the number 1 seed and having home games is a lot different story than not being the number 1 seed and having home games.
Yeah, this team, the goals have changed, so making the playoffs isn't the goal any longer. The Eagles wouldn't say that, but that's the reality of the situation. And when you look at the schedule and you see there's a couple games on there, namely Chicago and the New York Giants, so you kind of know you're going to win those games, so you can put them in the back pocket. But you're right. I mean, the Cowboys are still on the schedule twice, and they seem to be hitting their stride, playing a lot better recently, and the Ezekiel Elliott mess seemingly won't end. I think ultimately he's going to end up playing the entire season, and then you'll see him suspended at the beginning of next season. That's just my guess. So they're difficult. The Rams, hey, there's only one team with a better point differential than the Philadelphia Eagles, and that's the Los Angeles Rams. I would have never expected it, but they might be the most improved team in the NFL. And as you mentioned, Seattle's always a difficult place to play, even though they don't seem as good as they usually are. It's just not a fun place to play. So, yeah, there's a lot of hurdles. And, you know, the one thing Doug Pederson has been really, really good at is keeping the focus of this team from week to week, and we'll see how they are coming out of the bye. It's interesting, just writing about this today, Andy Reid obviously has the amazing record, 16-2 out of the bye. Doug's already 0-1. They lost coming out against Detroit, so it's going to be tough for him to match 16-2. But the Eagles, if they can beat Dallas coming off the bye, that's it. I mean, the Cowboys are done. They're not going to win this division. So that's a very, very important game.
Yeah, the game coming out of the bye week is a really big one because you're right. If they can win this one game against Dallas, that's going to make it very difficult for Dallas to overtake them. How is Doug Pederson going to deal with the growing expectations of this team? You know, everybody's talking about them. Now they're in a bye week, so they're going to be hearing it for 2 weeks now. How do you keep this team grounded?
Well, I mean, I think he's done it well already because the sort of the hype started a couple weeks ago, and it's just picking up steam, and it continues. I think a lot of it you can sort of put on Carson Wentz and the fact that for whatever reason he seems to be somebody who isn't affected by the outside noise. In fact, that's the one thing that surprised me the most about Carson Wentz. Good or bad, he doesn't seem to care about, media, fans, what have you, anybody talking about the Eagles being good or bad or indifferent. He's just not affected by that. And that's the way you have to be if you're going to be a star quarterback in this league. So I think it starts with him, and then it's trickled on down. There's a lot of veteran players on this team that have been through the wars and kind of know how to go about things. And I think it starts with Malcolm Jenkins and Brandon Graham and Jason Kelsey and players like that. So I think he's got a good locker room.
John, you wrote about Doug Pederson downplaying Carson Wentz as such over at the website 97.3 ESPN, and it sounds like that's one way he's trying to keep these guys grounded and focused by not propping his stars up on a pedestal.
Yeah, and I think in a way he's trying to insulate Carson a little bit because everybody –
although he doesn't seem like a guy – Carson doesn't seem like a guy that would let this get to him.
No, he doesn't. And I don't think he has to do what he's doing, but he's doing it anyway. And I think that's been a positive of Doug Pederson. I think that's where he really sets himself apart. I always say, when people talk about coaching, they only talk about X's and O's, and that's a big part of it. But it might not be the biggest part of it. The biggest part of it is managing personalities, and that's the part where Doug is undeniably been one of the best coaches in the NFL as far as getting guys on the same page and fitting them in to this system. And I think part of it, you kind of saw how he talked about Carson Wentz, because everybody wants to say Carson Wentz is the reason this team is 8-1. And that's probably true. But you don't want to create this environment where everybody else thinks they're just along for the ride, and it becomes sort of a mini Green Bay. You've seen the Packers fall apart without Aaron Rodgers because in Green Bay it really is Aaron Rodgers and everybody else. I think what Doug is trying to do is say, look, this is a team. We're all pulling in one direction. Everybody's a part of it. And to date, I think it's worked very well.
John McMullen with us here in the Sports Bash. Now, John, I know some of the assistants were available today, I believe, and they talked, but I want to get to what Doug had to say about Frank Reich, because I know he was asked yesterday, exactly what does Frank Reich do, and then the comparison was made as he's sort of like a bench coach, and Doug jumped all over that and said, no, he's more.
Yeah, he said he's much more than that. I don't think you ever want to throw a baseball reference out to a football coach, unless it's Jim Schwartz, because Jim loves baseball. But, it is not to disparage baseball managers or bench coaches, but there is a lot more to coaching when it comes to an NFL. And Frank is obviously very involved with the game plan and putting things together for what the Eagles want to accomplish for a specific week. And I think coming off the Denver game, it's a better example of what this offense has been able to accomplish, and the fact that they were able to look at Von Miller and Aqib Talib and players like that who are just, top 5 players at their positions in this league. And most other teams would game plan around them and try to go in different directions. The Eagles were able, at least on certain occasions, to use what they do so well against them. And I think Frank's a big part of that.
Is there a position coach that you think, or a group of coaches that you think have had more of an impact on why the Eagles are 8-1 at this point? Because Mike and I talked yesterday, and he threw out the theory that the Eagles are tackling better. So, of course, Doug mentioned Corey and the Tim Hawk and some of the Steve backs coach and the secondaries or safeties coach. You've mentioned on the program before that the receivers are better because of Mike Rowe, the new receivers coach. Is there one position or a couple guys, or is it just all, like you said, the assistant coaches are all rowing in the same direction?
Yeah, Yeah, I mean, I think if you would have to look at the star of sort of the assistant coaching staff, it's probably John DeFilippo, who's obviously the quarterback coach, and Carson Wentz. And you know, the Eagles kind of flashed that even before this season when the Jets wanted to hire him to be their offensive coordinator. The Eagles wouldn't let him leave, which is tells you how much they think of him. And so he's done a wonderful job with Carson Wentz, who's taken off, as we know, and would be, as I said, the MVP of this league. And then defensively, I think you mentioned the name, and people don't realize, because Corey Unlin is the secondary coach, but Tim Hawk is the safety coach. And if you remember him from his playing days in Green Bay and even here, and Tim will say it, I talked to him at length today, you know, he played in a different time, and he stayed around in this league for a very long time because he hit people and he tackled people. And he was one of the best tackling safeties in football. And when you see the improvement on the back end when it comes to form tackling, I think he's an under-key big part of that.
John McMullen's with us, 973ESPN.com. Check out the column at 973ESPN.com. And, you know, one of the things, the Cleveland Browns have been a team that have been getting laughed at, pointed at, and mocked for their decisions at quarterback. And, you know, the way they set their front office up in Cleveland has also been something that has really been, I guess, chastised around NFL circles. You wrote about what's going on in Cleveland today at 973ESPN.com.
Yeah, I mean, obviously it's unconventional, and anytime you do something that's unconventional, if it doesn't work, you're going to be sort of laughed at and poked fun at, in the fact that they took somebody really with no personnel experience in Sashi Brown. It took somebody out of the baseball world in Paul DePodesta and tried to go this Moneyball route in football, as so many people have done in baseball to a large degree of success, and even in basketball to a certain degree, with sort of the Sam Hinkie-like mentality of collecting assets, which they've been able to do. But in football, it's always, if you look at the individual moves and players like Myles Garrett and Jabril Peppers and David Njoku, you say, well, these are talented guys, and the Browns were able to move pieces around and get this type of talent in there. But then you look at the bottom line, and you see 1 in 23. Every sport's a little bit different, and in the NFL, the bottom line is quarterback means everything, and nothing else matters until you get the quarterback. And they not only miss once, they miss twice. And you can argue maybe 3 times or 4 times or 5 times if you want to add in names like Dak Prescott, which I don't think is fair because a lot of teams passed on him. Patrick Mahomes this year, George still out, obviously hasn't played yet. I haven't thought Mitchell Trubisky has played well with Chicago at all, but he would look like he would look real good to the Cleveland Browns fans, I can say that. So they passed on all these quarterbacks. And all of a sudden, they're stuck now, and they have to get a quarterback. And then they make the trade for A.J. McCarron, don't put the paperwork in. Let's take a step back and say they made that trade, and they didn't screw it up. Then you have A.J. McCarron. You still could have had Carson Wentz and Deshaun Watson. It's like, what are you trying to accomplish if you're just not going to take a quarterback in this league? It just doesn't work.
John, Mike and I spent time talking about, too, the difference between the Aaron Rodgers and like a Brett Hundley when we opened the show, or how about the drop-off from Deshaun Watson to Tom Savage? It's like going off the end of a cliff when you look at the talent level of those two guys.
Yeah, it really is. And I kind of wrote about that. That's one of my favorite quotes ever, which I can't say on the radio, came from Tom Moore, about somebody asked him, about, why don't you prep the backups more? just in case something happens to Peyton. And he basically said, well, if Peyton gets hurt, we're screwed. I'll use that term.
Yes.
And we don't practice screwed. So, I mean, that's when you have a star quarterback, the reality is if they get injured, you're not going to go to the Super Bowl. That's the reality. But, and I think Minnesota is the example of this, it doesn't mean you can't have a good football team. And that's where the Green Bay Packers have gone off track because they can't win football games without Aaron Rodgers. And we'll see. I mean, from Houston's perspective, look, they have a lot of injuries, past Deshaun Watson. It's just been a terrible year for them. They lost J.J. Watt, Whitley Merciless. I think they would have been in a better position to win football games if they didn't have all those other injuries. So from their perspective, it's some bad luck. So you can build around a great quarterback and still be able to win football games if they leave if for whatever reason, whether it's injury, suspension, what have you. But you can't be a Super Bowl contender.
John McMullen, read his column at 973ESPN.com. Follow him on Twitter at JFMcMullen. And, of course, his Eagles coverage always at 973ESPN.com. Daily here on the Sports Bash. By the way, Matt McGloin, 4 days. Thanks for playing. Josh Johnson signed in Houston. I would assume if I'm Green Bay, I need to find a quarterback because that guy was awful last night. The quarterback position makes the league go round, we should say. And
not in Cleveland.
Not in Cleveland. All right, man. Take care.
Thanks, guys.